Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Richard Hunt. I'm the Managing Director for Turnkey Consulting. Today we have invited one of our partners, Virtual Forge, to present to us and to our audience. We're going to be talking today about 5 ways to hack your SAP system. So a very interesting topic. It seems to have attracted plenty of people to join the webinar today, which is great. I've put you all on mute. If you have any questions, we'll be bringing those up later. If you'd like to put them into the chat, direct those to me if that's okay, and then I'll pass them on to Patrick. So we have as I say, a guest, Patrick Bock from Virtual Forge today. Virtual Forge is a company that Turnkey has been partnering with for some time now. They're a specialist in the technical side of SAP security, in particular code scanning and code vulnerabilities. So I'm very pleased to be welcoming Patrick to the webinar today. Just going to hand over presenter rights to him, and I'll let him get started.
All right, thanks, Richard. I now should have the presenter rights, and I hope everyone can see my screen and also hear me okay. Yes, let me first introduce myself real quick. I'm Patrick Bock. I'm in product marketing for Virtual Forge, although I have a more technical background and actually come from the pre-sales and consulting side of things. And therefore, I also have hands-on knowledge to some of the ways I will present today. But before we go into the actual different ways how hackers might attack your SAP system, I'd actually like to take a step back and sort of take a look at SAP security or IT security or SAP security from an IT security perspective. I've actually talked to someone who has been in IT security for 25 years, and he has a lot of certifications, so he knows his way around in IT security. And when I tried to explain to him what we do as Virtual Forge, namely SAP security, I of course dive directly into things like transports, clients, all the SAP speak, so to speak, which is involved when you talk about SAP in general. And he didn't know anything about that, so I really had to go more than one step back to explain what SAP is actually all about. And this is basically what this slide will represent. If you see IT applications in general, and especially from an IT security perspective, SAP will seem just like any other application. And of course, the security concerns also seem like any other application in the IT infrastructure. So in other words, nothing really special about it. Now that, as we probably know, is far from the truth. SAP is very different, I would say, from other IT applications in the sense, and this is what I try to represent on this slide here, is SAP is actually a IT infrastructure in itself. I mean, in SAP you have an infrastructure, so namely the application server, the database server, of course, all setting up on the regular IT infrastructure such as networks and databases and operating systems. But SAP has its own configuration, its own settings, and also its own security settings. SAP has its own identity management, authentication, risk detection even, and very important, I believe, SAP has its own development. And in fact, most SAP customers use the possibility of developing on top of SAP extensively. We've actually seen, we've scanned with our code scanning tools, we've scanned almost 400 SAP systems by now, and we see that the average number of lines of code for a typical SAP system is around 2 million. And if you put that into perspective of some other major applications out there, we see another reason why SAP is different. So just as sort of as a comparison, you have Mozilla Firefox, which is around 9.5 million lines of code. Then we have Android with around 12 million lines of code. Microsoft Windows 7, which was 40. Then I think next is Microsoft Office 44. Vista had some more lines of code, 50 million. I believe they now downsized Microsoft Windows 10 to probably closer to the 40 million of Windows 7. Debian Linux has 67 million lines of code. Mac OS, old version also at 84 million, so you can expect some of them or a little more in the current versions. But if you look at SAP, SAP has almost or 320 million lines of code, which is the SAP Business Suite. Just for reference, we've also lately scanned a standard installation of S4HANA, which has around 266 million lines of code. So as you can see, SAP is not only its own infrastructure in a way, but it's also very complex and very, very big. And this alone obviously gives a lot of potential for error. So with 320 million lines of code, you can expect that not all of them are error-free. But for SAP systems in particular, we see that there are three different ways how risk can actually occur in an SAP system or can be introduced into a system. One of them being the configuration. So you can set a wrong configuration. You can maybe activate a web service which has been known to be vulnerable. You can also forget to change the passwords of standard users, things like that. So by configuring things not correctly, you will leave an attack vector open for hackers. On the far side, on the other side, you also have transports. Transports can actually be misused to transport things like roles and authorizations, usernames, including a password, or programs which execute automatically on the target system. So transport is another potential threat area. And then what I mentioned, custom code. I mentioned that we find around 2 million lines of code per SAP system on average. And we also find around 1.1 critical security or compliance issues in every 1,000 lines of code for these 2 million lines of code systems. So you can expect around 2,000 critical issues which could potentially compromise the SAP system on any given SAP system. So that is definitely one of the larger areas where of concern, where you as a customer should take a look at. Also because the custom code is something which is within your responsibility and obviously not like the SAP standard code within the responsibility of SAP. So these are the areas where in general risk can occur, not necessarily attacks on hackers can occur, but where risk can occur. And let's actually dive into the 5 ways how hackers from the outside or from the inside actually can attack your SAP system. So the easiest way is actually one of the concerning the area I talked about first, so the configuration area. And I've actually mentioned one of the possibilities. So for example, SAP standard users. Some of you may know the SAP star user, which is one of the, I believe, 6 or 7 standard users which is automatically created when you install an SAP system. The standard password for the SAP star user is pass. But what's even worse, if you delete the SAP star user, there's a profile parameter, and if that profile parameter is set incorrectly, you can still log on with the SAP star user even though that user has been deleted. So if that is something you have not changed, and then on the other hand, you potentially have a web application which is facing toward the public internet, then you would have, you give the attacker an easy way to enter your system. And if you, it's pretty easy to do a Google search based on, you can see it here on the right a little bit in that screenshot, based on the URL schema, which is typical to SAP. You will find a lot of SAP systems on the internet, and you will also find a lot of just regular logon screens like the ones you used to know from an SAP system on the internet. I haven't tried it myself, I must admit, because the moment you actually try to enter using a username and password, it becomes illegal. But I'm sure that amongst the, what do we see here, around 85,000 results on Google. So at that moment, I'm sure among these 85,000 results, you will find at least one where an SAP star user has not been changed. So this is the easy way, and someone who would try that doesn't even need to know anything about SAP. I mean, this is publicly available information, both the SAP star and the password of SAP star. Google search is also pretty easy. So this is something that anyone can do, and I definitely recommend to take a look at some of these more basic configuration issues, whether these are actually secured. Next possibility, which is potentially, of course, a bit more difficult, is the malicious insider. Theoretically, and not only theoretically, but actually even practically, SAP users from the inside can easily plant or open a backdoor which can then in turn be exploited. And this is actually possible with any kind of SAP user. So it's not something where you would say this is limited to, say, a developer or an SAP basis admin. And on the contrary, we've actually had a sort of internal competition once at a Christmas party, actually, to be honest. But we asked our R&D department and the consultings to have a little competition about who needs the least number of keystrokes in order to gain SAP all access to a system. All of the contestants had a very limited standard SAP user to start with, and the goal was to give SAP all rights to that particular user. The winner, which was our CTO at the time, took 14 keystrokes to gain SAP all access. So if you know what you're doing, it's really, really easy. And even if you don't know what you're doing, you will still be able to find information to perform such a stunt on an SAP system. And SAP customers are more often than not pretty big customers. So amongst thousands and thousands of users, you will definitely find someone who has the potential and maybe even the sort of malicious thinking to actually try one of these attacks. Oh, yeah, this is actually one example which I failed to mention, but this is probably among all of what we call them sort of war stories, probably the most famous example. We did a code scan at a financial company once, and we found a Gmail address hidden in custom code, and the quarterly results of that financial institution were sent to that email address or Gmail address 2 or 3 days prior to the actual publication of the quarterly results. So sort of the worst case scenario. And what's even worse, it turned out that this employee wasn't with the company anymore for like 3 years. So he probably made a lot of money on the stock market. He just made one small mistake. He was using firstname.lastname@gmail.com, so he was pretty quick to be identified. But nevertheless, this is something which can happen and does happen. So this is an actual finding of one of our code scans. Then, of course, as a sort of next possibility to attack an SAP system, we have the typical hacker. And what you see here on the right side is a small hardware device, which is called the Wi-Fi Pineapple. And this is a real hacker tool. I mean, it's basically pretending to be a Wi-Fi network and sort of fooling mobile devices or any Wi-Fi device to log on to that device instead of the Wi-Fi network the device actually wanted to log on to. And with that device, there also comes an app store, so to speak, which contains apps you can install on that Wi-Fi pineapple and basically do whatever malicious things you can think of. There's an app for everything. So in other words, even for that is no special knowledge needed. And in addition, although this looks very technical with all the wires hanging out here, but this small piece of hardware you can get on the internet just like that. It's around £100, so not even very expensive. Yeah, it's easily available, including the App Store. And what hackers will do is they actually go to the closest Starbucks, try to take over all the mobile devices which are trying to log into the Starbucks Wi-Fi mobile, or actually any other mobile, even if it's not in close range. So one of my recommendations would be, if you're ever close to a public Wi-Fi and you don't need it, turn off your Wi-Fi on your mobile device. Case in point, of course, being if someone has access to your Wi-Fi credentials on your mobile device, it's pretty easy for them to also gain access to the corporate network. And once you're on the corporate Wi-Fi network, entering an SAP system is probably the smaller issue. This is sort of the stuff you would probably know from the movies, although it's realistic, but it's something which Hollywood would use in a way. There's another more dangerous, more imminent threat actually, and I believe it's probably among the most common used approaches for a hacker to enter an SAP system, and that is social engineering. Some of you might know the guy here on the photo, Kevin Mitnick, one of the first and I believe still one of the most famous hackers. And although he, of course, is someone who knows his stuff, he can program and all of that. But the reason he was such a successful hacker was not because of his coding technique or anything, but actually because he was a very good social engineer. So he was very good in manipulating people to give him information which they shouldn't have. So because, as it's stated here, the natural human tendency to trust, it is there, and therefore social engineering is very often the most effective way of hacking. And practical example here as well. Just call random numbers in a company and pretend to be IT support, and eventually you will find someone who actually has a problem with his PC, and they will, trustworthy as they are, just enter any given command you will ask them to enter. They will probably don't know what they are actually doing, and therefore it will be relatively easy to insert some malware or any command which will give you the possibility to enter an SAP system or the corporate network in general. Last but not least, something a lot of us might know from online banking or heard of from online banking, phishing. And until around 1 or 2 years ago, these sort of phishing emails were easily to spot. They were coming from a bank or from Facebook, but then it wouldn't say Facebook, but Facebook, or very easily spottable in the way that there were spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, or just a very bad layout where you would definitely say, okay, yeah, this is definitely not coming from a bank or from Facebook. These days, it's harder to these emails are harder to spot, and they've done a really good job in sort of pretending to be from an address where they're actually not from. And the only possibility up today is actually looking closely at the email sender in order to actually spot these phishing emails. And I expect that looking 1 or 2 years ahead, even that email sender can be spoofed, that's for sure, and it will become even harder to spot these emails. But anyway, what is phishing is, you're trying, of course, to obtain private information. You're trying to trick the user into clicking a link, or in the example we see here, into opening an Excel book and enabling the macros, enabling content, active content on that link to website or malicious documents attached. And there's one practical example which I shortly like to mention. It's called spear phishing. So it's phishing targeted at a specific person, usually even with a email sender the person knows and trusts. So again, it's pretty hard to see on the screenshot here, but here we have Mary, and Mary is receiving an email from Bob, colleague of hers. She knows him, and she trusts him, and he asks her to open a malicious Excel file and enabling the content. And in the background, a script is running, and that script is, if you want to know it from a technical point of view, is using the what's it called, BAPI user create in SAP, and creating a user which has SAP all, or in other words, all rights possible. And yeah, just like that, the attacker has taken over the SAP system. So these were just 5 basic examples, or 5 out of a lot of different examples how an SAP system can be taken over. But I think what's also important is to know how can you prevent such attacks as good as possible, or as well as possible. First advice I have is implement the security patches regularly. In fact, next week Tuesday is the SAP Patch Tuesday, every second Tuesday of the month. And SAP will come up with a bunch of security notes then as well. And it's highly recommended to implement those notes. Of course, we know also from our experience, it's not always, or it's usually easier said than done, because there's a lot of manual efforts involved in implementing some patches, maybe even a restart of an SAP system. And if you're a manufacturing company, you can't just restart an SAP system. I know from one company, chemical company, and they say that every hour the SAP system is not available will cost them 20 million euros. So obviously they cannot just restart an SAP system. Nevertheless, or what you can do to prevent it is you should determine a risk tolerance for each system. So you can actually say, I don't want to implement that particular patch for that system. I know the risks, and I'm happy, or not happy, but I'm willing to accept this. But you should also have a patch management policy in place. So in other words, once SAP Patch Tuesday is there, you need to have a process in place where, okay, for those systems where I can, and for those patches which do not need a particular effort, I will implement those patches as soon as possible. What's important to remember in everything you do regarding SAP security patches, as soon as Patch Tuesday is coming, not only will the customers know what vulnerabilities were fixed, but the hacking community will know too. And you can guess that, or you can bet that the first thing they will do on Wednesday after Patch Tuesday is try all these vulnerabilities which have been patched, because they know that not all users, or actually the majority of SAP users, will not have patched those particular vulnerabilities. Second advice, user and role management. I mentioned securing the standard users. Actually, these examples are not from the SAP NetWeaver ABAP stack, but from the HANA stack, so system users, SIT-admin users. Restrict authorizations, so make sure that every user only has those authorizations they need to perform their work, be it dialog users or technical users, but restrict authorizations. Also, use single sign-on, even if you have strong password policies. well, you know how it is with password policies. If you have a too short a password, it's easy to guess or easy to brute force. If you have a too long password, people will put a post-it on the monitor with the password listed or under the keyboard. Also, a very popular place to sort of hide passwords. But single sign-on actually makes things a lot more secure. So we recommend to use that. Just in general, extensive privileges compromise the entire system, and therefore rather be restrictive, more restrict with your authorizations than too generous. Thirdly, run a regular analysis. This holds true for the custom code. Again, 2 million lines of code. It's not something you can look at every day. And actually, if you do a manual code review, we estimate that a manual human code reviewer can review around 1,000 lines of code per day. And that's under the, or that's actually, if he's very awake, has a lot of coffee, and is very concentrated, then he might have the possibility to check 1,000 lines of code. An automatic code scan, like we offer the code profiler, can do around 30,000 lines of code per second. Also include that code analysis in the development process, or actually establish a secure development lifecycle in the first place. So make sure you have development guidelines which include security, and make sure you stick to it. Regular analysis also includes the system settings. With 320 million lines of code it was in an SAP Business Suite. There are a lot of security settings. Actually, we tried to count them once, and we stopped at around 1,000 because there were just too many. If you want to check them all manually, again, the ratio of automation versus manual is not as bad as with the code review, but nevertheless, just imagine logging on to every single SAP system, checking all of these thousands of settings, and logging out again, and then going on to the next system. That also takes a lot of time and effort, so it's also something where we recommend to automate this. Also, especially with system settings, we often hear from customers, yeah, okay, we've analyzed it, we have an audit maybe, and we fixed everything which the auditor says or told us to do, so we're good. No, you're not. Configuration drift, it's a term actually established by a company in operating system hardening, but nevertheless, it is a fact and it's a constant challenge. I sort of, for myself, I usually call this "can you please" phenomenon. And those of you who have worked in projects will know, during the project you go to the basis admin and says, "Can you please give me authorization for that?" Or "Can you please reset the profile parameter X to Y?" The administrator will be happy to do that, and then he forgets to roll it back after the project has been done or has been finished. And all of a sudden you have an insecure SAP system again. So analyze not only once but continuously. The goal of the game is, of course, to know the security status of your SAP landscape in general. Next, data encryption and security, something which is, at least by now, the case in most of the internet websites you see. Most of them have HTTPS active these days, but unfortunately it's not yet that common in SAP systems. The sort of the fact is, there's not even an excuse anymore for not doing it, because SAP is actually offering a technology they call SNC. It's for free, so you don't even have to pay anything, and that alone is reason enough to do it. SNC encrypts the communication between SAP systems, but of course there's other areas you should consider. Encrypt all sensitive data. Think of the European, the GDPR guideline or policy coming up in May next year. encrypt at all levels, so not only encrypt sensitive data, but also encrypt passwords and securely store them somewhere. And a very helpful hint, also establish some key management procedures, because if you encrypt all of your data and something happens, and then all of a sudden hey, good, I have it encrypted. Who had the key? And then no one knows where the key is. Not the ideal situation. So establish a key management procedure if you have the possibility, because that effectively minimizes data theft, or if data is stolen, it at least minimizes the possibility that someone is can do anything with that data he stole. Last but not least, auditing and logging. If something happens, you will be happy to have auditing and logging enabled to actually see what has happened, and this is all the more important if you think of the fact that between an attack and the company actually detecting the attack, the average time which goes between those two incidents is 146 days. So there's considered almost half a year in between the attack and the detection of the attack, and then you will be happy to have the logs and the audit logs and everything back from half a year ago, and you can actually see what happened and maybe find who was responsible to that. So enable all logs possible, at the very least enable the security audit log. Restrict authorizations to those logs, because it won't do you any good if you do logging, but then the attacker can easily erase the logs. And also restrict the authorizations for those people who are actually allowed to do some audits. Yeah, as I said, auditing enables forensic analysis in case of an attack. And looking at the time, just quickly dive into that three-phase approach. I believe that you have seen this sort of approach one way or the other at other security vendors. It's sometimes called find it, fix it, run it, or detect, prevent, and mitigate, or something like that. You know, a lot of security companies have a variation of these things, but it's still valid no matter how you call it. So first of all, get an overview of what you actually have, or what the status of your security is. In that case, SAP Systems. Stay clean. Make sure you don't introduce any new vulnerabilities into your system, and in parallel, of course, mitigate and fix those vulnerabilities which have been found. And of course, we are happy to support you in those three areas I mentioned earlier in the configuration, custom code and transport areas with our solution portfolio, which includes our system profiler, which is able to check your SAP system, with our codes profiler, which is able to scan your custom code, regardless of whether it's HABAP or ANA code, and also with our transport profiler, which is able to scan transports before they are actually imported into the system. We have professional services around it, some add-ons which you might need cleaning up, for example, to mitigate things. We have a cloud solution, which brings me to the next slide. If you want to have a complimentary vulnerability assessment, talk to us or talk to our colleagues from Turnkey. They will also able to help you to see within those three areas, configuration, custom code, and transports, where you have issues in any SAP system of your choice. So with that, I'm at the end of the presentation itself, and are there any questions?
Thank you, Patrick. Can you hear me again now?
Yes.
Thank you, Patrick. Cool. So thank you for that. We've been working with Virtual Forge and the guys there for over 10 years now. I think we formed companies in the same year in 2004, and I think the products that you've developed here have really been very groundbreaking in a lot of areas. They've inspired sort of a lot of improvements from in the SAP code base and in the SAP products themselves. And yeah, I'm very keen for our customers to consider looking at these types of products. I'm just going to open the floor for questions. If you'd like to send any questions through on the chat, just directly to me, and I'll read those out. So I've got one here for you, Patrick. It's an interesting one, which one is now. Would you say that the typical systems integrators out there that customers are generally looking to develop their code would be developing secure code?
Good question, actually, and indeed we had a rather well-known incident where a add-on from third party, from a system integrator actually, had a pretty critical vulnerability built in. In theory, of course they should, and actually we see a lot of our customers these days who actually require that from their third-party add-ons. So in other words, they will make it part of the purchasing process to scan the add-ons before they actually do the purchase. So they actually have that requirement. Is your code secure? Matter of fact is that not all customers do that, and a lot of third-party add-ons also say, okay, as long as my customers are not asking for that, why should I do that? Nevertheless, I think especially in the last years, SAP security in general has become more of a focus topic, and I believe that especially when it comes to programming, secure programming is now also on the agenda for both people teaching coding, but also the people who actually do the coding. So we see some improvement there, but if you want to be on the safe side, I recommend to also scan any third-party add-ons you might introduce into your system.